right. Well, hello and welcome, everybody. This is the first Science on Tap of 2019. Thank you all for braving the cold to be with us tonight. My name is Jason Keller. I'm the interim dean of Schmid College of Science and Technology. As many of you know, Andrew LouAnne, who has previously hosted these events, has stepped away from Schmid to take on the founding dean role for the Fowler's College of Engineering, the new engineering college on campus. If you've been paying attention at all to the social media at Chapman, we are really excited about the rollout and the buildup of engineering on campus. And I think tonight's speaker, Dr. LouAnne Boyd, is going to show you where that excitement is coming from. She's going to be talking about computers to assist, designing technology to improve human lives. And I think she's going to show you what engineering at Chapman is going to look like. And I think you're going to see that not only is she able to do just amazing science and engineering, but she's able to do that engineering for social good and to really improve diversity and inclusivity and accessibility in some pretty exciting ways. And so I think if she is an indication of what engineering at Chapman is going to look like, I think we are right to be excited about the start of the new college. For those of you that haven't been here or that need a reminder of the rules of Science on Tap, LouAnne and I will talk for about 20 minutes. We'll ask her some questions about what she does. We'll have her explain what she means by assistive computing. She'll talk about what she does better than me. Yeah, it'll be fine. It'll be great. After that 20 minutes, we'll take a break. That's a chance for everybody to refill their beers. Also a chance for everybody to use the note cards on the tables in front of them to ask some questions. We'll come back after that break, and we'll answer those questions. As an added incentive, if your question gets picked, we'll give you a free drink ticket that can be used tonight or at any other Science on Tap event throughout the rest of the series. Okay. So with that, LouAnne Boyd, thank you for being here tonight. And I'm going to start by just asking you to tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and what brought you to Chapman.
Oh, okay, great. So I am a recent Ph.D. grad in a field called informatics, and I specialize in a subdomain called human-computer interaction. So I went into this field because my previous career I spent as a therapist. And so I worked for 20-something years as a therapist working in schools, in hospital settings, and community settings with children with autism, adults with autism, and children with severe behavior disorders. And about 10 years ago, I met a researcher at UCI who built assistive technology for people with autism. And she came to our schools and she was looking for classrooms to deploy these projects in. And she found me and we just hit it off right then. And for the next 10 years, she would bring me projects, and that would be the best part of my year, like bringing in new technology into the classroom and trying it out and finding just the right classroom for her to work with it in. And after about 8 years into this, she said to me one day, "What are you going to do when you grow up?" And I said, I want to get a Ph.D. And she said, "In what?" And I'm like, "Well, I'm not really sure." "Well, why aren't you doing this?" And so, what? I can do this? That's an option? So I started that PhD and built a bunch of assistive technology for people with autism, specifically around social connectedness. And this is really kind of an interesting space because technology gets kind of a bad rap in the world of autism as being a way of disconnecting kids from reality and from people. And so I thought, why not get ahead of that and use technology as a way to actually connect people in ways that are more comfortable than perhaps face-to-face interactions. So that's what I'm doing here now.
I told you guys, it's awesome, right? All right, so I think my next question is just going to ask you to unpack that a little bit more. I'd love to hear sort of some specific projects that you've been working on at Chapman,
okay,
and some of the things that you're really excited about going on in your research team right now.
Okay, so I'll start a little bit backwards with talking about what HCI is. So how many of you have heard of that before this talk? 3 people, yay, okay. That's why I wanted to do this. This is great. So human-computer interaction, it kind of was born out of this third wave of computing. So back when computers were first used, they were the size of this room, and many scientists used one computer. And then we moved into desktop computing, where you would have one computer at work for one worker. And now we're in this place where computers are ubiquitous. Everybody has multiple devices. Probably many of you have more than one device on you that's a computer. And when that happened, it went from computers being something that scientists use or people use at work to something we use all throughout our day and all throughout our lives. And all different kinds of people use computers now. So it's not just at work. It's at home, it's children, it's elderly people, it's people with disabilities, and it's a way to connect us in ways that were never possible before. So there's an opportunity to figure out how do you help people that are not the norm, not the typical person that computers were designed for early on, be able to access those computers and use them in a really productive way. So I'm going to take a sip. So one of the things I did in my dissertation work was realize that we could use computing to help people with autism connect because it mediates an interaction. So I don't know how many of you guys like or dislike face-to-face interactions. People tend to be kind of on one side of the fence or the other, but for people with autism, this can be really challenging to just communicate basic social graces. So the work I did in my dissertation, we used augmentative reality and virtual reality systems, which we built some of them from scratch and some we used right off the shelf. And we took the concepts of social interaction that are very nuanced, like nonverbal communication, like some of the smiles and nods I'm getting right now, are communicated, you're using your whole body to communicate with me, the way you're positioned, the way you're looking at me, the way you tilt your head, and the way you speak. And so a lot of that gets lost in translation for somebody that might be overwhelmed with a sensory situation. So I made all of those visuals, all of those cues into visual components so that you could just look at a screen and get kind of a reading what's going on with this interaction. And the kids loved it, and the parents loved it, and we had really great success with parents saying things like, he doesn't talk to any of his therapists. We pay all this money for a therapist to come to the house, and he doesn't interact with them at all. But I put him in VR, and he is a chatterbox, and he's watching the visuals, and he's able to take all the visuals in at once, where he's not able to take all the nonverbal behavior in at once. So it's just really exciting to see that there's a whole new opportunity out there to get people on board and interacting. So.
All right, sounds amazing. Can you talk a little bit about the team that you've already put together here at Chapman? I think one of the things that I love so much about the work you're doing is that there's a really strong student component, and I'd love to hear what that's looked like for you so far.
Yeah, so I was really excited to continue the work I started in my dissertation as soon as I got here. So I'm teaching my HCI class, and I'm mentioning I work in VR, and I'm mentioning we build wearables, and we do all these neat, fun, out-of-the-box kind of projects. And students were like, well, how do we get involved with that? And I said, well, this summer, let's get started, let's get involved. So I had about 10 students come that took my first HCI class last year, and we spent the summer building from scratch a whole new suite of games in virtual reality. And we thought this is a time to be inclusive, and I've done a lot of work individually on autism, but I wanted to build systems that were for everybody. So we built a suite of games that kids with autism could play in, kids with ADHD could play in, neurotypical kids could all play together, and they would have their own mechanisms, if you will, to make those games fun and accessible for them. And so the students, I told them, I don't know if I can pay you. And they said, why would you pay us? This is like cutting edge stuff. We just want to learn it. So they came, without knowing what would happen. And that was great. They put in a ton of hours, but I think what was the most rewarding part for me was seeing their faces when we did our first user test. And that's something in a lot of computer programs you don't always get to see the end results. Like, how do users take that in? Is it actually usable? Is it actually useful? Is it ever going to really get used? You don't know until you put it into the world. And so we brought in participants that had autism, participants that had ADHD, and participants that were neurotypical to play together in the set. And I know I'm used to seeing parents get choked up, but I'm not used to seeing undergrads like sobbing about how wonderful it is to see kids get excited and interact. Like when they would go to meet them, the child might turn away and walk away from them, and they'd be like, "Oh, he doesn't want to be here." And then they see them in the game they built just light up, and it's changed their lives, and so that's exciting, and that keeps me motivated to do the next project and the next project.
So how do you balance these sort of really what are oftentimes seen as different fields and different skill sets, right? You're talking about building augmented reality systems and virtual reality systems from scratch, right? That's hardcore engineering. Mm-hmm. But you're also talking about developing a network of community partners in the education world and the counseling world. How have you been able to sort of navigate that interdisciplinary space?
I think I'm a natural connector, so I think some of it's just personality. That's kind of how I thrive, is finding kind of the commonality between all of us. And so it's always been fascinating that these fields have overlapping concepts, but they might just have different vocabularies. And kind of going to school and learning a completely different field and being like, oh, in psychology we call that this. Like, I already know that thing. It's just called something different. And the fields don't typically talk to each other. But when you do projects like this with people in the real world, you have to work across disciplines. And it's fun to ask somebody, like, what do you mean by that term? And then realize, okay, I know what you're saying already. Let's call it this, or now we have this shared vocabulary. So that's kind of one of the challenges, is figuring out each stakeholder's role in it and what they get out of it and how to articulate. Yes, we can do that piece, but this is how they all fit together.
I think that's just amazing, and I think the idea that this is happening in engineering and science courses and you're getting those students out there has to be really unique.
Yeah.
So, that's amazing. Talk about where you see your team going. So you're fairly new at Chapman, right? Mm-hmm. Talk about what you see as sort of next steps for you. What are you building towards as we roll out the engineering college? What are you excited about? What does this look like 5-10 years from now for you?
Oh my gosh.
Or a year and a half, or like next week.
How about this summer?
Thursday.
Thursday. So I'm really interested in building many, many collaborations. So I think to be a good citizen of this community, I want to do community-based work. So if any of you guys have ideas for projects, find my email, call me. I'm always interested in what could make a difference in a community. I love being tossed a problem to solve. So I'm kind of looking for community-based stuff. And so a class I'll offer next semester, it's the first-time course called Computer-Supported Collaborative Work. We'll be doing a community-based project right on campus. We'll go into a department and work on kind of workflow. We'll look for design spaces we can make better. I don't want to call them problems, but we'll look for areas that we can improve with technology or with new ideas. So that will be one piece that I'll have going, is kind of how do I serve my immediate community.
Can you unpack that piece just a little bit more? What do you mean by not problems, but workspace? Unpack that just a little bit more for me.
Yeah. Well, if you go into a situation as if something's a problem and you're going to solve it, you don't always have people opening up to talk about the problem, right? It's not the most welcoming thing. If somebody hasn't come to you with a problem, you've come to them and said, hey, I want to work on this. They're not necessarily welcoming you with open arms. But if you can go in and say, hey, we're going to be a fresh set of eyes, and we're learning all these theories in our class, and we want to put them to work, and we want to see how people actually use this in the real world instead of just what does it say in the textbook. And then it doesn't have to be a problem that you're trying to solve. It could just be tweaking something to make it more inclusive, or just stuff that people didn't realize could be faster, easier, more fun, because someone from a different perspective was able to come in and look at it. So we call those design spaces instead of problems.
Okay, so that's a new class project that you're rolling out. What are the assistive technology sort of fronts for you right now?
Right, so I'm transitioning. We've been working this past year with the students that took that first class. We built a suite of games that we call it VR Sensory, because we wanted to hit people at a really foundational level where we're all managing the sensory input around us. And at that place, we all have this container to deal with, and how we take in information is unique to us. So if we start there rather than starting at a label level, like with autism or ADHD or dyslexia or a learning disability, or just being plain old typical, which is boring, by the way, then if we can start at this base level, we realize we actually have a lot more in common, that you don't have to have necessarily a diagnosis to not like scratchy clothing. Like, there's all kinds of things that we do to manage our physical environment. So with wearable computing and just ubiquitous computing, being aware of how people relate and interact with sensory experiences is important. So we're taking that project, and we'll probably move on to getting really technical and bringing some more science in. It's so fun to watch the students' eyes pop, and you're like, we're going to get EEG in here, and we're going to get eye tracking in here, and we're going to confirm that these participants are saying that they're comfortable and their faces are lighting up, but how do we take it one step further and see even more patterns that we can't see just at first glance? So that'll be one piece, kind of sciencing up the VR project, like taking the VR and taking it to this kind of clinical space. And then we have another project for the community that's came out of a class. Has anybody taken software requirements as a class? Anybody? Eric used to teach it, so was that fun? Because he gave it to me, so I know it's a fun class.
Compared to what?
The other computer science classes. So this class is about learning to write in a technical way so somebody could build a technology based on what is written and spelled out. So it's like a 500-page textbook, and it's very, very dry. But it's very, very important because it's really important to communicate to a builder what they need to get right, because they're not there knowing how you intend for it to be used. So we took that class, and we decided we'd make it something for the campus, and we're in the process of actually building it, but we spent the semester designing it, an app for just inclusivity, for diversity across the campus, for people that have sensory differences or people that are on the spectrum or people with learning challenges. So we're going to see how that, like, the students are like, okay, we spent a semester writing it up, but now actually to build it and to put it into the world, and then they're really, really proud of it. Like, I can see their minds ticking, like how they could be entrepreneurs, just saying, like, that's what you do? You build it, you try it out, you test it every step of the way, and then you let it be born. So.
Amazing. Okay, so I'm going to wrap us up actually a little bit early just to keep us on schedule here. And we're going to do a quick break, give people a chance to refill their glasses and write those questions out for us. Again, you know, we're talking about engineering programs that involve helping the community. We're talking about writing. We're talking about engaging students. Any of those things are fair game. She knows everything about everything from what I can tell. So don't be shy with those questions. We look forward to taking those in the second part of this. We'll give people a few-minute break to fill up their glasses, write their questions out. We'll come back and pick up those questions after the break. All right, so we're getting the thumbs up from Panther Productions, which means we must be back. So really fantastic questions. It's really fun to go through and see some common themes that popped out. It was actually really hard, I think, to pick the ones we wanted to answer. So you earned your free tickets tonight with these exceptional questions. All right, so the first question that we have is, what platforms did you use for the VR and AR applications? Were there limitations you had to overcome given the current state of the technology? So whose question is that? All right, well done.
Yeah, it's a great question. Yes, so 3 of the projects I'll talk about briefly. 2 of them are on commercial hardware already. So when I talk about building, and I'm talking about building the software. So starting with the interaction design, how do we want users to interact with it, and then writing the software to support that interaction. The VR, we used HTC Vive, and the rationale for that was it had just come out at a reasonable price, and it was not making people motion sick anymore. And so we're like, okay, that's a good thing. Let's go for that. And we can talk about why VR in another question. And then for AR, right when I started my PhD, we had just gotten a grant for Google Glass. So it had just come out, so you have to go back to like 2010. And people were really excited about it. Nobody knew where it was going. And of course, it flopped and no one has seen it since. But in that little window of time, I got a little bit of work in. And that actually will lead to the next question. But the third AR project, we actually built from scratch. So we built a mobile phone app, but we also built a sensor system that we used off-the-shelf sensors, 3D printed a box to wear it, and had a lot of fun. So you can do these things when you have a great team. So it was, we kind of use whatever's out there. I really like the idea of doing wearables, so I'm interested in working with people that also do stuff with digital fabrics and other things. So there's lots of potential. Thank you, and get your drink ticket.
Okay, so next question. Have you noticed any positive or negative differences in regard to autistic kids interacting with AR versus VR, since AR is incorporated into the world around us, whereas VR is a full virtual immersion? Whose question is that? Well done.
Whose question? Awesome, that's excellent. That's chapter 6 of my dissertation. So I'll just refer you to that. So being a therapist, starting from that position, I started with really privileging face-to-face interactions and really wanting people to be connected, because I feel like that's really such a key piece of our humanity, is to be connected. And so AR systems make a lot of sense. You're in the physical world and you have something to reference to kind of augment that situation, make it a little easier. So I started in that space and I had pretty good success. But what I found out was that the samples that I used, I was having maybe a dozen kids come in per study. The kids that did the best with the AR system were the ones that needed it the least. They could use it, they were fine, but they weren't really the kids that really needed the help. So I was kind of in the situation like, how do I help more? I need to do more because that kid did great, but he didn't really need it as much as this other kid who's kind of fumbling with it. And so we started talking about how do you ramp kids up to understand how to use an app in a live situation? How do we get them into that space? And that's the question that led us to VR. So it wasn't something I saw coming, and initially when my advisor mentioned VR, I was like, but what? That has nothing to do with the real world. And that's kind of an illusion. We're kind of in this space where what is real and what is virtual and what is experience. So some of the things I'll say is moving into that VR space and watching kids come alive. When they weren't alive as much in the AR situations, they were still really nervous. They still had to manage all of the face-to-face interaction, all the sensory pressures, all the nonverbal cues. And now I've put an app in front of them, and I'm standing there with a clipboard and a timer. So how are they going to do, right? But I put them in VR, and now I'm gone. Everything else is gone. The possibility that someone's going to reach out and touch them, it's gone. So a lot of the threats were removed, and I did not really see that coming. The people I knew that were already big fans of VR were like, yeah. But I had to kind of experience it myself, and I had to go through it with other family members and teachers and other people that had that same starting position that I had, that this was not going to make any sense. So then people say, well, how do you know it carries over to the real world? So one thing that I'll just say, in the field, we don't say real world anymore, because if you're experiencing a feeling, it's real. So we say physical world. So, the question was, do I have to do a final study to show if these interactions in this virtual world translate to the physical world? And I said, I'm not even going to do that study. Don't even give it any, the time of day, because just look at the photographs from my study. So I have a young lady who came 2 summers in a row. She came for an AR study, and this study was on proximity, how close we stand to each other. And I used an anthropologist's metrics to say, hey, when you're in an intimate relationship, you stand less than from your elbow to your hand to somebody. And that makes sense because they can get their hands around your neck. So you better be pretty close to them to let them that close to you. And then, we keep people at arm's length, literally that expression. So we were teaching kids. Any of you have been in the field, this is a lesson we teach kids a lot. So she had the cues on her phone that showed how close she was, if she was in the right zone or not. She would not even get from me to you. Like, she would not even get near a really friendly research assistant that, it was just me, his mom, and this research. She wouldn't approach him at all. Sat on the couch, put her headphones on, didn't even want to be there. And then she came back the next summer and watched her sister do the study in VR. And she just watched the screen and watched the monitor. There's nobody else in the room. She's just in VR. And then we were ready to pack it all up, and she's like, I'm ready to try it. So she gets in it. She wouldn't do the other study. She gets in this one. She does the study. Right off the bat, she goes right up to the avatar that's in the image. So there's an avatar of an actual physical person who's just in the next room. So we introduced in the beginning, but then he went in the other room to get in his system. They talk. She says hi to him. She's giggling. She's trying to reach and put her hand through him because, it's just space. She's having all these interactions. Her mom's in tears, of course, like, what? This kid doesn't talk to anybody. And so I was like, well, that's really neat, but it's a cartoon guy. She's not going to meet a cartoon guy in the physical world. Okay, well, I don't know what I'm going to tell my dissertation committee, but that was really cool. We get ready to pack up. I'm, saying my goodbyes to him. Carlos, the research assistant, comes around from the other room to say goodbye to them as well, and she recognizes him, and she goes up and she talks to him. So I was like, I'm not doing this study. I'm sure people will do this study, but I don't need to do this study. Like, just having these experiences with families that I've seen over time where they are making the transition, or at least this young lady did. I feel confident that what she experienced made her comfortable enough to know he wasn't a threat, that she had a chance to talk to him where she would have didn't take that chance before. So that's kind of why VR.
That's amazing. All right. This is the best part. Yeah, the Science on Tap thing's going to work out fine. All right. Okay, so another question about VR and AR here. So what was the purpose of the VR and AR applications? Was it therapeutic or quality of life? Whose question is that? Excellent.
Yes. So yes, it was therapeutic and quality of life, but I think I know where you're going. So ideally, a therapeutic intervention is going to improve your quality of life. So I'm being a little silly there, but I started from the place of as a therapist. I'm, credentialed as a therapist, and that's, I've written goals, and I know we have limited time to help people learn, and we have to use our resources in ways that are going to change people's lives. So I started from this place where everything I did had to have kind of a therapeutic value. And then when I look over time, parents are like, yeah, but as soon as we leave the therapy office and we go home, life is different. We do different things at home, and we have different concerns, and we're not really concerned about how many inches he's standing away from his aunt. We have different priorities. So I've transitioned my work now to work more on leisure skills and social interactions in much more naturalistic ways, because that's actually a larger part of our life than the 8 hours you spend at work. You've got the other 24 minus 8, 16 hours that are leisure. So, yeah. So I'm moving toward more of a quality of life approach.
We saved this one because we think it should be like a 6-word answer for last. I like that you built an app for all users, but I'm curious if you plan any apps that are targeted to users at dramatically different parts of the spectrum. We actually thought this was a fairly interesting question that's going to take some time. Whose question was it?
Yeah,
Perfect.
that's really, really excellent question. And I think that's the challenge of it, is there's this concept of universal design. And if you can build things that are general enough, that are not built for kind of just the norm in the middle, that you've made the parameters of your system wide enough that more people can access it, then you've done well. But the thing is, when you get out to those edges of the bell curve, the differences are quite different from each other. So building a system that can meet most people's needs and then those edge case needs too is really, really, really tricky. And so I think more of what we need to do is kind of bespoke systems where you're building it you're customizing it for people in situ. So it's not necessarily that there's going to be something you can buy off the shelf that's ever going to meet everyone's needs. And so saying that, my work, I first wanted to go to this place where I wasn't designing just for autism anymore. I got to a place where somebody said to me, and it really woke me up, they said, if it's for people with autism, will anybody but somebody with autism ever use it? And I said, well, probably not. And they said, well, then just by using it, are you calling out that they have autism? And I'm like, probably I am. Yeah, so there's a chance to be stigmatizing if I'm building something that's only built for something that's considered to be a disability. So now I want to approach it in terms of just meeting individual needs, which we all overlap so much in, then it covers much more of the spectrum. And then I won't be creating a technology that's actually adding stigma to somebody's life instead of making it easier. So we're really trying to make these inclusive and go out to those edges. But then to get back to the idea of dealing with kids that are dramatically different than probably one standard deviation from the mean, like to get to that second standard deviation from the mean, which is where I am now. I have one project I'm working on where we're looking at perception from like the first milliseconds of when you take in information and how to manipulate it at that point so that we can actually change the way people see the world. If we can change imagery, if we're already realizing that some kids are taking in the information so dramatically differently that they will never have the same input. So if we can change it from that front end and realize, like, where are people looking in a scene? If I've never looked at all the components to get that this is a talk and people are looking here, how do I highlight that for people? So I think it's going to be just finding those individual differences and really targeting, like, how do we think of it more globally and not like what is going on at the first seconds that people take in information, and how do we make changes there? I don't know if that answers. That's a pretty big idea. But it's a really good aim. I'm really looking forward to the challenge.
And I'm going to try and squeeze in one more for us here. The question is, are there nonprofits to provide access to these technological resources? Or do they have to give money to pay for the therapy to get access? Whose question was that?
Oh, yes. Another great question and another yes. So yes, there are people that are working toward. Initially, I got into this field before I made the leap to the Ph.D. I made a leap to private practice, and one of my goals was to commercialize some of the technologies that we're working on. So there is a big gap between research and people building innovative technologies and them actually being available in the world. And so it takes investors to come in that space in between and do the work to make them commercial. And so that's a problem. And the field has made some effort to make things open source. So there are lots of websites now that we're loading our projects for free online so that people that have access can download them and kind of take them on themselves, because that's what we're doing it for. The other thing we do is really work toward keeping industry relationships. So I've made friends with people at Google, I made friends with people at Microsoft, and they do typically work kind of technologies, but they're very interested now in diversity and inclusion and kind of letting them know, like, hey, we're working on this and we're thinking of it in a big scale where this could be, an added thing you put on a toolbar to make life more accessible for people. And so we are trying to think of ways to push it into the community so that they're actually usable and they're not just research idea of the day.
Okay, so I think with that, we will sort of draw things to a close. Thank you,
Yeah,
LouAnne
thank
Boyd.
you. Thank you, guys.
And sort of, just to close it out with where I started, we're pretty excited about engineering at Chapman because it's going to look a whole lot like this, which I think is a pretty unique space. So thank you for giving us a glimpse of what we have to look forward to. Lots of other thank yous. Thanks for Chapman Crafted for continuing to host this event and providing excellent beer. Thanks to Panther Productions for making us look and sound good, to use Andrew's vernacular. Thanks to the entire staff of Schmidt College of Science and Technology that coordinates these things, specifically Sarah Buckley, who is responsible for getting you free beer tickets if your question gets picked. We've got a really great lineup for the rest of 2019. Our next speaker will be on February 18th, and that will be Maduka Agba, who's a new biochemist, organic chemistry professor at Chapman University, and he'll be talking about the lessons that we can learn at the molecular scale from biological interactions and how we take advantage of that. We then continue on in March 11th, with Doug Fudge, who's in the biology department at Chapman University. Doug studies hagfish, these slimy critters that release oodles and oodles of slime on the bottom of the ocean. And again, looking at lessons that we can take away from biology for industry applications and all sorts of really interesting biomimicry studies that he's doing with the students in his laboratory. So really exciting lineup coming in 2019. Again, thanks to all of you for being here tonight. Thanks also to our parents, volunteers, for making this run smoothly and for providing the speaker with gloves. I don't know what it says about a university, but when your parents are willing to come out in the cold and give up their gloves so that the speaker can drink her beer, we're doing something right. So thank you again. We look forward to seeing many of you at the remainder of our Science on Tap events through 2019.